Hey YouTube, Austin Vintage Warfare here today to talk about a subject that I kind of get asked a lot in my Instagram DMs and via email occasionally. And that's usually how to go about saving sporterized military surplus rifles and or piecing together new rifles out of parts. So going forward, YouTube, this isn't me telling how to build a firearm. It's just me saying, hey, maybe you should go this direction in looking for what to buy. But before I begin, go ahead and like the video if you do, dislike it if you don't. It's a sacrifice to the algorithm that gods, and in turn, it helps me out. I appreciate you. Thanks. So when it comes to military surplus rifles, we all know that if you're in that space, that there's a lot of military surplus rifles that were changed from their original military configuration into an affront to God. And in reality, it was because back in those days, military surplus rifles were just so plentiful and so cheap, they just didn't really value them the same way, and they wanted to make them more useful in a utilitarian sense rather than keeping it original because they didn't think that, oh, well, maybe one day these won't be imported anymore. They were wrong. Now, when it comes to certain military surplus rifles, some are worth more than others. Some hurt a lot more to see in a sporterized configuration nowadays than others. As an example, this one is a sporterized pattern 17, but this one's actually a pretty easily savable one, and I'll go over that in a moment. But there's also Arisakas and Carcanos and all these other cheaper ones that have also been sporterized. Doesn't make it any less sad, but when you see something that's a lot more expensive like this, it hurts. So when it comes to some sporterized rifles, this one is actually a really, really lucky find because it doesn't have a drill and tap job done. And a drill and tap job is when there are two holes cut into the receiver so that they can mount, plates for optics or mount scopes or whatever it is they were using back then. And but to do that, they have to actually make irreparable holes inside of the receiver. So that's something usually you're not going to be able to fix, and you're going to have to kind of work around. So for an example like this here, the first thing that I would do is I'd have to replace the stock entirely. And unfortunately and heartbreakingly, this is an original stock. This is all matching. This stock was the original one for this barreled action. So this whole stock's got to be replaced. But what you would then do, because there's nothing really you have to do in terms of the barreled action itself, you would have to take the stock off. You'd have to buy another one. eBay is a really good source for military surplus stocks. You can find certain things on like an Apex gun parts or some like auction sites have a lot of spare parts guns. Actually, like live auctioneer, proxy bid, those sites, so you can find some good stuff there. As an example, there was a Springfield 03A3 that was unsavable because it had a drill and tap job done, and they lobbed off the front sight hood. So at that point, all I could really do was get all of the original military components, get the stock fixed, get the barrel bands, all that fun stuff. And then basically at that point, turn it into the sniper variant. I believe that's the A4. So there are more creative ways to get it to look like it's military accurate or clone correct. God forbid I use that term, but sometimes you're gonna have to think outside the box. It's gonna take a little bit of ingenuity. So this is a parts rifle. This is a K98 that I have pieced together. Now 9 out of 10 of you can do this. Getting a stock, a barreled action, or piecing together a barreled action is not as hard as it looks. You just get it into the stock. There are tutorial videos on YouTube how to do that as well. I'm not telling you how to put it together, I'm just pointing you in the right direction. Most of the parts are acquired on eBay. The receiver on most weapons has to be bought through an FFL or something like that. In this case, that's what I did with this K98 here. And they are a little bit harder to find, but it ended up saving me a lot of money in the long run. Now, the only thing that you're not gonna be able to really do, unless this is what you do for like a job, is getting this barrel or a barrel threaded into the receiver. You see those threads right there? So you could torque the barrel into the receiver about as much as you can until it's going to start requiring like machines for that to work. And sometimes they might have to cut the threads on the barrel because it's not original with the receiver. So sometimes it's been altered or there's something it's just off. And that's mainly done to just make sure that this is headspaced properly. And usually costs about 100, 150 bucks. You'll still end up saving some money. And then that also means it's not going to explode in your face. I can't stress enough, unless you really know what you're doing, don't attempt to just thread a barrel willy-nilly into the receiver of a military surplus weapon. That gun might explode, and we don't want that here. Now, I think there's two types of weapons that it's worth doing this for. For a K98, these usually run above $1,000, more than that nowadays, unfortunately. But I probably ended up saving about 500 bucks doing this. Now, that's a rifle worth doing that for, especially because it's kind of a sought-after rifle. But if it's something like a Carcano or a cheaper military surplus weapon that are still being imported, etc., etc., I would just recommend that you just buy it, unless you're saving a rifle or you want, you're just wanting to put more in circulation. Yeah, I would just recommend buying it all put together. It's not worth it. All right, guys, that's going to do it for me today. Exhaustive Vintage Warfare. Want to thank you guys. Almost at 200,000 subscribers. It's insane to me. And I have more content coming up in the future. I have also started a Patreon. I'll also have that in the pinned comment. If you guys, want to see certain content, I know like people want me to do a bunch of stuff, and it's just like paying out of pocket, my dude. YouTube don't actually pay that much. So that being said, guys, I will see you in the next video. Later.